Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Ange Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 2 tight end rankings for the 2021 fantasy football season. On today's episode, of course, we're covering all topics related to the tight end position, beginning with matchups. We'll start by talking about which defenses were giving up the most points to opposing tight ends last week in a half PPR scoring format. Of course, talking about which players have potential upside based on advantageous matchups, or of course, which players we might want to avoid based on the fact that they're playing against defenses that are great against stopping the opposing tight ends. We'll cover that. Then we'll talk about my top 16 tight end rankings before we get into today's video, and of course talk about my thought process, my opinions, and the stats that justify my rankings. I of course want to take the time to thank you guys. We just recently surpassed another milestone for the channel in terms of subscribers, but we are closely on our way to getting to 50,000 subscribers. So if you guys have not yet already, click that subscribe button, join the community. We're going to be making fantasy football content for the entirety of the 2021 season, all up until Week 18. So for those of you who are interested in, of course, getting rankings, Sunday morning live streams, waiver wire episodes, hidden gems, matchup videos, all of the above, make sure you subscribe to the channel because that'll be coming in your direction, trying to help you win a 2021 fantasy football championship. Thank you very much in advance for those of you guys who have continued to support. Comment down below. Join the Discord community server, help out by supporting on Patreon, and of course, smashing that like button every day. Thank you very much, guys. Now, before we start talking about the tight end position specifically with matchup, I do want to remind everybody that down in the description of the video, we do have timestamps. So if you're looking for one of your two tight ends, you want to go ahead and just hear my thoughts on it, you can go check it out down there. While you're down in the description of the video, you can check out my link to my Patreon for those of you guys who are interested in supporting there, getting full rankings, whether it is in a half or full PPR, on top of the fact with flex rankings, which I only offer to Patreon users, and get all of your 2021 fantasy football questions answered, whether it is a trade question, starter sit question, whether it is a waiver wire question on the weekly basis. I'll answer every single one of those for those of you interested. All right. So let's talk about matchups at the tight end position. As we know, the tight end position in fantasy football is relatively simple. You're going to start your studs, but if those of you who don't have a stud at hand and you're trying to determine whether or not you should be playing the number 13 or the number 14th ranked overall tight end in a given week, this is what this episode is for. But I wanted to go ahead and begin by talking about matchups going into week 2 of the 2021 fantasy football season. On the left side of the screen, we have the week 1 2021 tight end points allowed, which means how many points the defenses allow to opposing tight ends last week in a half PPR scoring format. Of course, the Dallas Cowboys got Gronkowski to drop 25 on them, obviously making a point there. But what I wanted to go ahead and just preface beforehand is, yes, the Dallas Cowboys gave up a lot of points to opposing tight ends, specifically only Gronk, and maybe Jared Cook has himself a good week this week, but a lot of these stats will take a couple weeks to find formation and find a consistency, because though the Tennessee Titans gave up 0 points to opposing tight ends last week, it wasn't because the Tennessee Titans are good at covering tight ends. In fact, it's the opposite in comparative to years past, in which year over year, their linebackers have had struggles in terms of keeping up with opposing tight ends. The only reason that they benefited from only allowing 0 points is because they play the Cardinals. The Cardinals do not use tight ends. Max Williams is their best overall tight end, and he's a primary blocking option for that offense, whether it is run blocking or pass blocking. He never really gets any work in the passing game, very rarely. Now, in comparison to defenses like the New England Patriots or the Denver Broncos, those are defenses that are certainly going to be some of the better ones across the National Football League as we persist week through week. But we just have to keep an eye on, yes, which defenses gave up the most points last week, and was it a fluke? We'll go ahead and keep that in mind. But as of right now, the Cowboys, Cleveland Browns, San Francisco 49ers, Baltimore Ravens, and the Green Bay Packers gave up the most points. It shouldn't be a surprise that Travis Kelce killed the Cleveland Browns defense. It shouldn't be a surprise that Hockenson had himself success because he is the only receiving option. But then again, they did have a lot of offensive plays. 92 offensive plays leading to 11 targets. That seems about normal, but obviously those numbers are going to decrease over time. And then, of course, we had Darren Waller get himself, 19 total targets against that Baltimore defense, regardless of how good they have been in the last couple of years in terms of stopping opposing tight ends. Waller's going to expose your defense nonetheless. So we'll just take that into account. Of course, Green Bay's defense couldn't stop a soul in any scenario. The Denver Broncos and their entire offense as a whole highly values the contributions of their tight ends. Last season, they were amongst the top 10 in terms of total tight end targets. Of course, you got Albert Okwuegbunam coming back. You have a fully healthy Noah Fant. Of course, they were able to put up some good points as a duo against that Giants defense. But just wanted to go ahead, pose these numbers, kind of give you guys some perspective as to how many points defenses allowed to opposing tight ends last week. Now that we've gone ahead and covered this, We'll go ahead and, of course, refer back to these statistics as we go through our rankings today, but I want to get into it, shall we? Let's start talking about my top 16 tight end rankings for week 2 of the 2021 fantasy football season. Let's go ahead and begin with Travis Kelce. Really shouldn't be a surprise that Travis Kelce found a lot of success last week, considering in the last 9 regular season games of Travis Kelce's career, he's averaged 20.53 fantasy points per game in a half PPR scoring format, coming off of a contest in which he had 7 targets, 6 receptions, 76 yards, and 2 touchdowns, and 22.6 fantasy points. Are we surprised that Travis Kelce is the best tight end in the National Football League? Absolutely not. He's going to continue to be a huge part of that offense. We all know that you should be starting him, and that's all I have to really say. Now, this upcoming week, he takes on the Baltimore Ravens. Luckily for him, we have a little bit of experience with top-tier tight ends playing against the Baltimore Ravens, specifically Darren Waller, and Darren Waller having himself a 19-target, 10 reception, 105 receiving yard, and 1 touchdown game for 21.5 points. I think Travis Kelce very easily has himself a very good week because, again, the opportunity is there. The looks are certainly going to be there down in the red zone, and his value is going to continue to keep going up. We have Darren Waller, who we just mentioned, having himself a fantastic week. In fact, had a career high in total targets this past Monday night against the Baltimore Ravens defense. Again, a defense that at times was putting Marlon Humphreys, a top 10 cornerback in the National Football League in terms of coverage grades by Pro Football Focus. He's amongst the top, which is ridiculous considering, Darren Waller is a very good tight end, but when you're putting the top corner on him, which we've seen in the past, I mean, you go back to the 2020 season, when they played against the Dolphins, they put Xavier Howard on top of him, and it didn't really make a difference, right? So ultimately, Darren Waller, regardless of what the defense is facing him, he's always going to succeed, similar to Travis Kelce. I mean, Darren Waller, in the last 8 regular season games of his career, of course, including the first game of the 2021 season, and the last 7 of the 2020 season, he's averaged 19.37 fantasy points per game in a half PPR scoring format. The offense ultimately runs through him, and I know he plays against the Pittsburgh Steelers this upcoming week, but a lot of people are going to maybe think that the Pittsburgh Steelers are automatically going to win that game because their defense is great, their offense is potentially going to get back on track. I still think that Darren Waller, regardless of what they play, is going to get targets, as we've seen, and that's always going to lead to success. Like I always mention in fantasy football, opportunity is king, and that's what Darren Waller always will have. We move on to George Kittle as our number 3. George Kittle is coming off of an okay week. 9.8 fantasy points in a contest where they didn't really have to utilize his talents as much as, of course, Deebo Samuel and Elijah Mitchell taking over that game. I still think that there is a very good chance that George Kittle has himself an incredible game here and maybe ends up in the top 2 conversation, perhaps surpassing either Travis Kelce or Darren Waller. And the reason why I have that kind of feeling is mainly because of past performances, specifically against the Philadelphia Eagles. When we go back to 2020, the Philadelphia Eagles contest consisted of CJ Beathard and Nick Mullins as the starting quarterbacks, rotating, of course, replacing one another in that game. And in that contest last year against the Philadelphia Eagles, if I'm not mistaken, it was week 3, George Kittle had 15 targets, 15 receptions, 183 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown for 32.6 half PPR points. Now, when I think about, okay, George Kittle playing against the Philadelphia Eagles this week, is their defense look the same? Yeah, relatively similar. And on top of the fact that you've got an improved quarterback situation here, better offensive line, the running game's going to continue to be consistent, play action is going to show up in comparison to last year in this specific contest. I think ultimately, as an entire offense and defense, they are far more healthy, and it's going to potentially lead to George Kittle's success this upcoming week. When we think about what the Philadelphia Eagles had to deal with last week, of course, Hayden Hurst and Kyle Pitts in the matchup, both of them were decent, but ultimately were only able to combine for 8 catches, 59 total receiving yards. I think that, yes, there's a potential of going after this defense. I know the Atlanta Falcons weren't able to fully take advantage of it because the inexperience of a Kyle Pitts and Matt Ryan was getting just stuffed the entire game. The offensive line was falling apart on a consistent basis. I think that completely changes this upcoming week as San Francisco is far more equipped for the challenges ahead. George Kittle should be a monster this week. We move on to number 4, TJ Hockenson, who's coming off an incredible week, 21.7 fantasy points with 11 targets leading to 8 receptions, 97 receiving yards, and a touchdown. We talked about it all offseason. TJ Hockenson is going to be the only receiving target in this offense, and though that may not relatively be the case because you have, Quintez Cephas scoring a receiving touchdown. We have Tyrell Williams getting involved. Amon St. Brown. I mean, we have a lot of receiving options. Even the two running backs were able to catch the ball, 8 times a pop? So yes, there's a lot of competition for potential targets, but we have to take in mind it was a very difficult matchup against that 49ers defense, and he was still able to find a lot of success against them, which is very promising. Now, with that being said, the Detroit Lions did play 92 offensive snaps. Jared Goff, if I'm not mistaken, threw the ball 57 times, 58 times. That is an unbelievable number that most likely isn't going to happen again. And if and when it doesn't, he's getting a target out of every 5 plays. Let's say they throw the ball only 35 times. We'll get 7 targets out of him. That's fine. We'll take those kind of numbers because we know that TJ Hockenson has the talent to at least take those kind of opportunities, limited or not, and expand upon them, whether it is in the red zone. I absolutely believe in TJ Hockenson. I believed in him before the season began, and we're full go. Plays against the Green Bay Packers. The Green Bay Packers did end up giving 2 touchdowns to their opposing tight end, Juwan Johnson. But with that being said, I don't really take those into account. A lot of those was garbage time, and ultimately, I think the Green Bay Packers defense are going to be turning a new leaf over this upcoming week. But with that said, TJ Hockenson, a fantastic matchup, and potentially has himself another big week here as our number 4. Moving on to Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews, out of all these other tight ends that have always been in this top 5 conversation, had the worst week. I mean, it was unfortunate that he was only able to get, 3.5 fantasy points, 5 targets leading to 3 receptions and 20 yards. In comparison to week 1's past, the guy was a 20-point machine and unfortunately wasn't able to find success. Again, the offense as a whole were pretty effective in the first half, but in the second half kind of fell apart. Too many turnovers, whether it was fumbles, of course, from Lamar Jackson killing a lot of their drives, and or dropped passes in the direction, of course, of Mark Andrews, which he has to haul in. With this all being said, they play against the Kansas City Chiefs. And the reason I have Mark Andrews here is because you have to start him. And when you play against the Kansas City Chiefs, you have to score a lot of points. Otherwise, you are going to be blown out. That is just how it is. And if you can't at least score early and keep the ball away from Patrick Mahomes, he's going to get the ball back and he's going to consistently score. And if and when that's the case, you're going to have to catch up. As of this current moment in time, the Baltimore Ravens that we saw on Monday night isn't the maximum potential of this team. In fact, it looks like they look like a shell of themselves, to be honest. Hopefully, they can get back on track this week. Mark Andrews, of course, is a red zone demon, and I absolutely believe that as long as he gets the targets and the opportunity potentially going forward, I know 5 targets is not enough. When we see Patrick Ricard and, of course, Tyson Williams getting targets out of this backfield as a check down option, it begins to scare me for the potential of Mark Andrews, but hopefully that is going to expand itself in the coming weeks, specifically this week in a pretty relatively high-scoring matchup between the two teams. Kyle Pitts is our number 6. So Kyle Pitts at number 6 shouldn't be really a surprise. At this current moment in time, I think, yes, his week 1 performance was unfortunate. Amongst all first-round selections of the 2020 NFL draft that were picked within the first 15 pick skill positions, every single one of them scored a touchdown except for Kyle Pitts this past week. That is unfortunate, but he was given opportunity, 8 total targets, 4 total receptions, 31 yards against a Philadelphia defense that wasn't great, but Kyle Pitts wasn't given that many opportunities, in my opinion. Not quality opportunities either. Yes, at times he lined up on the outside as a wide receiver. Sometimes, in the inline next to an offensive tackle. And with the ability to be kind of a dynamic receiving option wherever you line him up, I think his exposure to opportunity is only going to increase going into this upcoming week. You play against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and by all means, this is the most difficult matchup that you could possibly have for a quarterback potentially under pressure and a running back that obviously isn't going to be able to set up anything. The question is, where are they going to go with the ball? Calvin Ridley is, of course, going to get a lot of targets going in his direction in order to try to help this team. But I think Kyle Pitts is going to be their number 2 option because that's what he was this last week. Now, this past week, Thursday Night Football, we did see Dalton Schultz and Blake Jarwin both combined for 9 total receptions and 65 receiving yards. Decent numbers. But I wanted to go and take a little bit of a deeper look and see, have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers given up a lot of points to opposing tight ends? Because I remember last year specifically, they were horrible against opposing tight ends. And in fact, they weren't that good at the back end of the season. When I look at just the 2 games that Hayden Hurst at the back end of the year played against them, Hayden Hurst had 2 contests. The first one, 5 targets, 4 receptions, 21 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. Great performance. The next game, 4 catches, 28 yards, and a receiving touchdown. Hayden Hurst was able to produce against this team, hopefully. Matt Ryan, when they play against this defense, already knows, we need to go ahead and get our tight ends highly involved as much as we possibly can. Now, the points don't really stop there with the tight end position going against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, because since week 9 of the 2020 season, this defense has given up 6 touchdowns to opposing tight ends. And if you include the NFL playoffs, we saw Logan Thomas go for 5 catches, 74 yards. Robert Tonyan, 4 catches, 22 yards and a touchdown. And Travis Kelce last year, 8 catches and 82 and 10 catches and 133. There's a lot of potential for Kyle Pitts. He's just got to be given the ample opportunity to succeed this upcoming week. I think that'll be there because, of course, this offense, they got relatively shut out in week 1, and I think they're coming back for a little bit of revenge in the matchup. We have Rob Gronkowski on the other side of this matchup, playing for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, coming off an incredible week. In fact, being the number 1 overall tight end with 25 half PPR fantasy points. I mean, that is just beautiful. 8 targets leading to 8 receptions, 90 receiving yards, and 2 touchdowns. I mean, of course, down in the red zone, he is always going to be a threat for this offense. But this isn't something that should be a relative surprise. There's a reason why I had him as my number 13 last week. There's always the potential, and we even talked about it, there's always a potential that Rob Gronkowski scores touchdowns. And if he does, he's going to be a huge fantasy prospect. But in the given weeks that he's going to be left out for dry, doesn't score a touchdown, isn't given the ample amount of targets, of course he disappears. But the thing that I wanted to mention, in the last 11 regular season games in the 2020 season, he averaged about 9.71 fantasy points per game. Now, that was after the first month of the season had already surpassed, and we have heard like Bruce Arians say, yes, he's not a pass catcher for this team, but ultimately they were just trying to get him back into the rhythm of football. And once they did, of course, he was almost a 10 point per week kind of guy in a half PPR scoring format. And that's what he should be going forward if he's going to see this kind of usage. I mean, we didn't see a single target to O.J. Howard or Cameron Brate this past week. So the real competition for Rob Gronkowski as it currently stands are running backs and Mike Evans. Because we know Mike Evans down in the red zone is a guy that wants to score double-digit touchdowns. That's what he did last year. Now, we know also that they're playing against the Atlanta Falcons, and if this matchup gets out of hand, Leonard Fournette, Ronald Jones, they should be able to run the clock out in the second half. So with that being said, those are the biggest threats to Rob Gronkowski. But as it currently stands, the way that he looks, everything that we've heard out of Bruce Arians in terms of how healthy Rob Gronkowski looks in comparison to years past, he feels the best he's ever felt. I mean, going back to even the last 4 or 5 seasons in New England, Gronk says he feels better than he ever has. And of course, him and Brady are just continuing to rack up points. Moving on to our number 8, we have Logan Thomas of the Washington football team. And the reason why I wanted to go ahead and do a tight end video today instead of a quarterback video is mainly because there's no quarterbacks in this Thursday night contest that you want to be starting. But you do want to start Logan Thomas, and I'll tell you exactly why he should be an automatic start. Besides the fact that he's coming off a week, 3 targets, 3 receptions, 30 receiving yards and a touchdown, 10.5 half PPR fantasy points, a decent week. But you may be wondering, Andrew, is he really going to be that good with Taylor Heinicke? Guys, I know Ryan Fitzpatrick was going to be a huge part of this offense, but he was mainly going to unlock the potential of Terry McLaurin. Outside of that, he was going to be a game manager. And to be honest, when I look at what Taylor Heinicke has done with Logan Thomas in the past, I find myself getting more excited about the potential of Thomas going for the rest of the season. And to be honest, the difference between Ryan Fitzpatrick and Taylor Heinicke isn't going to be that big of one. Now, let's go ahead and talk about some statistics that we've seen. The first time Logan Thomas and Taylor Heinicke played together, 12 targets, 7 receptions, 63 yards. The next time in the NFL playoffs against Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 5 catches, 74 yards on 9 targets. Again, that's incredible target count. That's already 21 in 2 games. And then this past Sunday, of course, coming into the game at the end of the second quarter and at the beginning of the third quarter, they were both able to connect all 3 of those targets and receptions were with one another. So you don't have to worry about that having been included with Ryan Fitzpatrick. And then when we think about, yes, the New York Giants, they're coming off of a week in which the Denver Broncos tight ends as a whole had 10 receptions, 85 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown, all for 17.5 fantasy points. Kind of leads me to believe that, yeah, that's probably a spot that you want to go ahead and attack against this defense and continue to go after. Logan Thomas should be a good play going into this week in combination with Taylor Heinicke feeding him the rock. Moving on to our number 9, we have Noah Fant, speaking of the Denver Broncos, taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think Noah Fant's coming off a great week. 8 targets, 6 receptions, 62 yards. I mean, ultimately, you may be thinking, yeah, 9.2 fantasy points, not the greatest, but for a tight end that you invested relatively late for, that's exactly what you want to see. 9 points a week, we'll take it every single week, no questions asked, because the potential for upside going forward is definitely going to be there, and I think there's a potential for that this upcoming week. They play against the Jacksonville Jaguars, one of the worst defenses in the National Football League. We know that for sure. I mean, the fact that they got blown out by the Houston Texans speaks volumes to me, because their defensive coordinator really could not handle anything, because they were getting consistently scored on, whether it was on the ground, through the air. I mean, if Tyrod Taylor is beating you in 2021, you know there's a significant problem, especially considering the hodgepodge offense that they have there of, Danny Amendola scoring touchdowns. What are we doing? Anyway, I'm not here to talk bad about the Houston Texans. I'm here to kind of boost up the value of Noah Fant this upcoming week, because with Jerry Jeudy being out, there's going to be a potential for him getting even more targets in this offense. I know Albert Okwuegbunam had himself the receiving touchdown amongst the tight ends last week for the Denver Broncos, but that could potentially change this week. I expect it to be a high-scoring affair, specifically for the Denver Broncos, and once they've gotten ahead and they're continuously scoring and throwing the ball, I expect Noah Fant to have very similar numbers to last week, if not better. So I think Noah Fant is a great option this week. Moving on to our number 10, we have Dallas Goedert of the Philadelphia Eagles. I think Goedert is a fantastic option, but the thing that I wanted to go ahead and first and foremost mention was Zach Ertz. Yes, he played 10 less snaps than Dallas Goedert, but wasn't as effective, which is fantastic. We love to see it. 5 targets, 4 receptions, 42 yards, and a touchdown going to Dallas Goedert. 12.2 fantasy points. That's exactly what we want to see, especially considering many of us drafted him to be the starter for this offense. And that's what we expected. And hopefully that'll continue to stay as such and status quo. But you never know. Maybe Zach Ertz comes in, steals a touchdown every now and then. That's always the risk. But with that being said, they have a relatively okay matchup against the San Francisco 49ers. We did see TJ Hockenson expose that defense. And if in fact that defense wants to go ahead and fix some of their issues, they can certainly try. But I think the Philadelphia Eagles are certainly going to be keying in on that and going after their linebacking core, whether it is Dre Greenlaw or Fred Warner, which again, they are good linebackers. But I think at this current moment in time, if there's any advantage to have, it is with the tight end position of the Philadelphia Eagles. I know their wide receivers played well and maybe could potentially do so again this week, but the safety blankets are going to be Goedert and the checkdowns to the running backs. That has already kind of presented itself in the first couple weeks for Jalen Hurts, a young and inexperienced quarterback. I think Dallas Goedert's a great option this week, as he was last, and we're going to continue to roll him out there. Tyler Higbee is our number 11. Now, Tyler Higbee had himself another good week. 5 catches, 68 receiving yards, 9.3 fantasy points. We'll take that. Outside of Cooper Kupp, he seems to be the next in line in terms of the safety blanket of this offense, because everybody else is running down the field. And as soon as Matthew Stafford looks down and doesn't see anybody else open, he's either finding Cooper Kupp or finding Tyler Higbee. And that's going to continue to gain value for him. Again, we saw Matthew Stafford heavily utilize TJ Hockenson last year. Over 100 targets. We could very easily see that for Tyler Higbee this season, and I think that's absolutely going to be the case. As long as Tyler Higbee can stay healthy and stay on the field, he is literally the only tight end option on this offense, considering, again, Gerald Everett left to the Seattle Seahawks this offseason. Playing against the Indianapolis Colts may not be the easiest, but his former teammate, Gerald Everett, last week scored a touchdown. Of course, Will Disley was getting involved in that offense. It wasn't the greatest performance in terms of that tight end core, but I think in terms of which offense is more heavily focused on getting the tight end the ball, I think the Rams would take the cake there. Tyler Higbee, not a bad option this week. Now, for those of you who are upset about Robert Tonyan's performance last week, we have to remember that Bob Tonyan is a touchdown machine. And when he doesn't score touchdowns, you're going to eventually, every now and then, get a 4-point performance, a 5-point, a 6-point performance. But 1.8 points last week was a fluke. And we have to all come to, that conclusion. You don't often see the Green Bay Packers completely get decimated like that. And that's not going to happen potentially for the entire rest of the season. And as of this current moment in time, I put Robert Tonyan as my number 12 because, yes, there's a potential he doesn't score a touchdown. We have Devontae Adams to feed. Marquez Valdes-Scantling could steal a touchdown. Randall Cobb. You got 2 running backs, A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones, who could both potentially score this week. With all that taken into account, if you want 10 fantasy points this week, I think Robert Tonyan is going to get it for you. Put him in the lineup, get him ready. And the reason why I believe that is because the Detroit Lions cannot stop opposing tight ends, and they really can't stop good tight ends that are focused heavy down in the red zone. Now, obviously, George Kittle this last week wasn't focused heavy down in the red zone, but he did get himself 4 catches for 78 yards. Okay, 9.8 fantasy points, almost 10 points. But when we look at what Robert Tonyan was able to produce against this defense last year, 2 catches, 25 yards, and a touchdown the first time they played. That's 9.5 fantasy points. Second time they played, 5 catches, 36 yards, and a touchdown, 12.1 fantasy points. Robert Tonyan is going to be a 10-point fantasy play. Whether it is a 9.5 or an 11.5 point, it's going to be somewhere in that range. So get ready, put him in the lineup, and let's get it going. we have Jonnu Smith as our number 13. Now, I think Jonnu Smith last week showed a lot of potential, of course, getting himself a rushing attempt. We want to see more of those, of course, but we'll see. 5 targets, 5 receptions, 42 receiving yards, 7.3 fantasy points. Wasn't the greatest overall performance, but it was relatively tough in terms of the matchup in comparison to what I anticipated it being. It seemed like, yes, the Miami Dolphins in years past had not been able to cover the tight end position, but they did a pretty good job in doing so. But when we think about what Jonnu Smith pretty much presents to this team, he is typically going to be a short yardage guy. He's not going to run routes, relatively down the field. It's going to be short dump offs to either him or James White for majority of these third down conversions. And of course, the yardage per reception kind of tells that story. Now, you go against the Jets this upcoming weekend, though the Carolina Panthers weren't able to take care of that advantage that they had last week because, again, they don't really utilize the tight end position in their respective offense. I know they have Dan Arnold, but they don't focus with him. Either way, I think Jonnu Smith going into this upcoming week's matchup is a great overall play. Again, the Jets last season were giving up the most points to opposing tight ends in the National Football League, 15 points per game on average. There's always a potential that Hunter Henry comes in and takes some points here and there. But as of right now, I feel comfortable enough with Jonnu Smith, despite the fact that he has another person taking targets from him at this similar position, to be my number 13 and have himself a good week here. Jared Cook's my number 14. Jared Cook's coming off a great game, 5 catches, 56 yards. Ultimately is fine. But the issue that I have is you never know. If, in fact, Austin Eckler comes back and is getting himself 12 targets and Mike Williams sustains his 12 targets, where is, Jared Cook going to kind of finalize himself in this offense? Is he going to be a 5-target guy per week? Is he going to have to rely upon touchdowns in coming weeks? I think that's mainly going to be the case. Playing against the Dallas Cowboys is a great matchup. Of course, we saw Gronk absolutely destroy them last week, but a lot of it was done down in the red zone. So unless we're going to see more and more red zone targets, which of course we saw last week. I mean, we did see Jared Cook get some red zone targets, one-on-one coverage, of course, some pass interferences by the defense because he is a 6'7", 6'8" giant. That all being said, he is a good option, but definitely will rely upon the red zone work to kind of get him over the edge with Eckler getting more targets in the coming weeks. Mike Gesicki is my number 15. You may be concerned because last week he played against Bill Belichick and only came up with 0 receptions. Yes, that's right. 0 receptions, 0 points, but had 3 targets. We'll take that. This upcoming week plays against the Buffalo Bills. Not as difficult of a matchup. The Buffalo Bills were able to shut down the Pittsburgh Steelers tight ends, but ultimately that wasn't the point. The Steelers as an offense couldn't do anything last week. Were very barely able to come back in that game and win. Of course, the defense was able to score and get them the victory there. This upcoming week, I think Tua is certainly going to be looking in the direction of Mike Gesicki because last week was completely shut down by Bill Belichick. The last 2 times that Mike Gesicki has played against this respective defense, the Buffalo Bills, last season, the offense knew we're going to get him heavily involved, and that's exactly what they did. The first time they played against him, 11 targets, 8 receptions, 130 yards, and a touchdown for 23 fantasy points. And in the second contest, 10 targets, 5 receptions, 47 yards for 7.2 fantasy points. So in the last 2 times that he's played against them, he's had over 10 targets each game. I think that could potentially be a recipe for success this week. But hopefully we can get there, and that's exactly going to be the case for this upcoming contest. It's a matter of you might not want to play him because you might have better options, but keep an eye on him and keep him on your bench for potential upcoming weeks if he catches fire. The last option I wanted to mention is Cole Kmet. Cole Kmet is coming off a game in which he played I think majority of the snaps for sure at the tight end position in comparison to Jimmy Graham. He had about 40 plus snaps overall offensively, and Jimmy Graham had like 11. The target counts was 7-2 in favor of Cole Kmet. Of course, having himself 5 catches for 42 yards, 6.7 fantasy points isn't the greatest thing in the world. But when I was watching the Bears offense, they didn't look bad in the first half. Yes, they threw an interception in the red zone. Yes, they fumbled on of course, pressure to the quarterback and Andy Dalton giving the ball up. But Andy Dalton has an opportunity to take on his former team and put a number on them. And I think there's a lot of people thinking that the Bears aren't as good as they really are. They are a good team. Don't get it twisted. They're a former playoff team. They've got the pieces. I think they'll be able to put it together, and I think Cole Kmet's going to be a huge part of this offense, especially down in the red zone going forward. I think he's a great option this upcoming week. Those are my top 16 tight end rankings for week 2 of the 2021 fantasy football season. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Tomorrow, we'll talk about the quarterback position. Do not worry about quarterbacks tonight because, again, you're not playing Taylor Heinicke and or Daniel Jones unless you're playing in a super flex. And in that case, I prefer Heinicke over Daniel Jones. But Daniel Jones has never lost to the Washington football team in his entire career. Just putting it out there. Anyway, make sure you subscribe. Like today's video. Thank you very much. I appreciate you guys supporting. And until tomorrow, which of course we'll be talking about the quarterback position, I'll see you guys. Peace.